All right, I had a request to talk about the requirements in the real world for the DE or the data engineer, data engineer. This is the top job. This is number one, and has been for like a long time, almost a decade. Uh, Google actually is the one that said this was a top job a long time ago. And if you look at Google's data engineering, they have a data engineering exam. You'll see something very strange. You'll see half the questions on their data engineering exam are machine learning questions. And you think, well, why did they do that? And they believed, and they still do, that the data engineer will morph into someone who creates data pipelines, and the machine learning model is just part of the pipeline. I thought there was a need for a separation back in the day, so I emailed them and they said that's interesting. Basically, that's interesting, but we don't see it that way. I'm like, all right, well, you're Google. You certainly should know. So they still believe that the machine learning responsibilities will eventually be taken over by the data engineer, and I don't know that they're wrong. All right, that's just an aside. So let's talk about what is a data engineer. They're the companies. They work with all kinds of data, all kinds of data. They were born from the DBA role. This was the top role, number one role in every company for a long, long time. DBAs are more siloed. You might have a DBA here that is a SQL Server, SQL SS. I'm not sure that's really a good use of initials. Anyway, so SQL Server. We have MySQL. We have Postgres. We have Oracle, right? And the DBA would work in one of these verticals. He wouldn't work in all of them. All right. So a data engineer is more of a widespread role. And that, of course, creates problems because the next question is, well, how widespread? And the data engineer is such a diverse role that almost all companies have their own take of what a data engineer is. But there are some commonalities, and we'll talk about those. So number one, yeah, this is an obvious one. It doesn't matter what data engineering role you have, you will know SQL and you'll know it very well. This is the number one requirement. Nothing's even close. Anyone who tells you any difference is full of shit. All right. SQL is the number one job requirement. After SQL, we have this idea of moving data. All right. So we're moving data. We're moving data. All right. So, well, where are we moving data? Why are we moving this data? Where is it going? Where are we moving the data? Why does it have to move? Why can't it live in relational databases? And why can't it live in Excel spreadsheets and all the other places that data is thrown around the organization? Well, because it makes reporting very, very difficult. And if the systems can't speak to one another, you really don't know what data you have. All right, so where does it going to live? It's going to live in this place, and this is called a data warehouse. And this is mostly what data engineers do. They're going to move data to and from these things called data warehouses. Now, a relational database, these are both databases, both relational database, right? A SQL Server is a database, but it's relational. It's relational. These are not relational, all right? Well, they're semi-relational. These are wider in terms of the table structure. This is meant for fast transactions, and this is really meant for reporting. So we've got this central repository of data for the organization, and we have data all over here. Here's some data, and we've got to get it in here. And not only do we have to get it into the data warehouse, we have to do it on a continuous basis. So we have this concept called CI/CD. Continuous integration, continuous delivery. So that means when this data here changes, it needs to come to the data warehouse. And the change needs to come with it. And that change needs to come with it, whether it happens today, yesterday, or a week from now. There must be this continuous flow of data into the data warehouse from all these disparate data sources. Now, this could be a relational database, again, like SQL Server. This could be Excel files hidden on someone's desk somewhere. Um, it could be anything. And oftentimes you're going to need tools to do that because this sounds easy. Oh, this sounds easy, but it's hard as hell, actually. And there are a lot of reasons it's hard as hell. We won't get into that now, but it's very difficult. And in order to do this, a lot of times you're going to need another tool for that. You're going to need a tool to help you keep this data warehouse up to date, right? So we've got this data warehouse, and we're going to say it's Snowflake. This is right now probably the most famous data warehouse on the market because it works on the big three, AWS, it works on Azure, and it works on GCP, right? And if it works here and it can scale however you want it to, then that's really good news. So you're going to need this tool we were just talking about, and you're going to have to know that. So not only are you going to need to know the basics of the data warehouse, not only are you going to need to know a relational database system or the basics of all relational databases to move the data in here, right? You're going to have to know this tool. I used it at several places, a company called Fivetran. And again, it's a tool that helps me create these data sources, and keep this process flowing. All right, so inside here we have databases, right? Database 1, database 2, for each of these. And we can join on these databases, right, from all these disparate data sources, and we can query them. Now, there are some things here that need to be in line before we can do that, but it's becoming really commonplace to be able to pull in data and marry it to all the other data in your data warehouse. And this is basically what the data engineer does. Every data engineering role I had, they wanted you to know a relational database system. Again, mine was SQL Server. And they wanted you to know a data warehouse. And they wanted you to know the tool to move data around the organization. And for those who know me, I was SQL Server. And for me, I work with Snowflake. And I worked a long time ago with BigQuery. And actually, BigQuery was the OG, so to speak. And the Snowflake people used this to create Snowflake. So Snowflake is nothing more than BigQuery. It's the same thing. It's the same principle in all three of the cloud providers. So the problem for many people is, well, what are you learning? How do you get started in this? Well, you start off with SQL, because if you don't have SQL and you don't have SQL experience on your resume means you've worked within the real world, you have no chance of working as a data engineer. You don't know any SQL, and you're going to write complex queries to move data around the organization? Yeah, it's just not realistic, right? That's something that's not going to happen. So SQL is the number one skill you're going to have to learn, right? And again, in this role, you hear me talk about the MLE role where there's no entry-level roles. This has no entry-level roles. The transition, again, for me, is probably from the data analyst role to the data engineer. Or if you're a DBA, you can be a DBA, right? We can also say data engineer. We can all DBA to the data engineer. This is an easier one. If you're a DBA right now, the transition to a data engineer is easy, right? Because all you have to do is learn the data warehouse component, and you've got to learn the data movement tool, which is this idea of CI/CD, moving data continuously into these data warehouses.